Imagine being sued over a wooden trunk because it felt emotionally HOA-ish. Now imagine the person suing you wears designer sunglasses to pick up litter on camera, because court-ordered community service is still community service. Welcome to the neighborhood. Hope you brought a lunch. When I pulled up to my late uncle's old place in Vista Ridge Hollow, the kind of silence that settles into your bones met me like an old friend. Not the peaceful kind. No, this one hummed like it was waiting for a verdict. The house hadn't changed much since I was a kid. Still the same peeling green siding, the porch swing barely hanging on by a rusted chain, and the cracked concrete driveway leading up to what looked like the last stand of rebellion in a neighborhood ruled by manicured hedges. My name's Daniel Price. I'm 36, a carpenter by trade, and the legal owner of this patch of dirt and stubborn lumber after my Uncle Harold passed away. He never married, never moved, and never ever joined the HOA that surrounded his land like a well-pruned noose. I'd barely turned off the ignition before I noticed the old stake still poking out of the front yard. Peakrit land, not Visit Ridge. The letters were faded, but the message was clear. I smiled. Good man, Harold. I started unloading the U-Haul with the kind of caution usually reserved for surgery. The first to come out was a table I made myself. Hand-cut joinery, no screws. Then came the shelves, and then the cedar trunk. That damn thing weighed as much as a guilt trip from your mother, thick iron clasps, corners worn down by decades of existence, initials HP carved into the side like a signature no one was allowed to erase. Harold pride. Mine now. I set it gently on the porch, like it was a relic dug from under some ancient battlefield. The house welcomed me with a groan when I opened the door. It smelled like oiled wood, tobacco ghosts, and secrets. A stack of boxes sat in a corner labeled H. Price Don't Touch. Of course, I touched them. Inside were manila folders, maps with red lines, and old letters with official stamps. One of them proved Harold had built half the damn community center, but never signed over his land. Let them keep their bylaws, he scrawled in the margin. I'll keep my trees. I was halfway through moving the second bookshelf when it happened. The sound hit me like a fly swatter to the back of the neck. High-pitched, precise, entitled. You can't leave that truck there. I turned slowly. A woman in her 50s, maybe, was marching across my gravel like she was invading Normandy. Platinum bob cut, oversized sunglasses, clipboard, and a peach-colored blazer that looked like it had never touched a speck of dirt. Excuse me? I asked, already regretting it. She stopped at the edge of the property line, at least my property line. This is a perimeter buffer zone maintained by the Vista Ridge Hollow HOA. Your vehicle violates Regulation 4.3, non-resident loading and unloading procedures. I blinked. Ma'am, this is private property. I own this land. I inherited it. It's not part of Vista Ridge, never has been. She gave me a smile that could crack drywall. I know who you are. You're Harold Price's nephew. That line of dirt right there, it's shared use buffer zone, page 14, paragraph 3. I raised an eyebrow. Are you quoting HOA scripture at me right now? She didn't blink. We'll be reviewing your property classifications shortly. I suggest you move your truck. Then, under her breath as she turned, she muttered, typical non-compliant bloodline behavior. 15 minutes later, I heard the crunch of tires and the flashing lights of 2 county sheriff cruisers pulling up to the end of my driveway. One officer got out, hand resting just shy of his holster, giving me that squint cops say for people holding crowbars or open containers. Sir, we got a call about a suspected theft in progress. Items allegedly taken from Vista Ridge Community Center. I stared at him, then at the trunk sitting peacefully on my porch. You mean that? I asked. That's my uncle's. His initials are carved into the side. I have the will inside and the deed to the land. You want to see it? The officer hesitated. Then behind him came the click-clack of purposeful footsteps. Karen, because of course her name was Karen, arrived holding a color printout of what looked like a chest vaguely similar to mine with the caption, Community Archive, missing since 2018. She held it up like it was a smoking gun. That's the trunk, she said breathlessly. It disappeared during the remodel. I was suspected someone internal. And now, here it is. I looked at the photo. Wrong hardware, wrong wood grain. Even the base was off. That's not even the same shape, I said. And unless my uncle was a time-traveling thief, I'm going to go ahead and say this is mine. The officer glanced between us. Do you have any documentation that proves ownership? Karen puffed up like a puffer fish in a lawsuit. I recognize the patina, she said proudly. I have an eye for antiques. I nearly laughed. Instead, I walked over, flipped the trunk slightly, and pointed at the initials. HP Harold Price, want to carbon date it? The cop tried not to smile. We're going to log this as a civil dispute, he said, retreating into the safety of paperwork. Karen stood there stunned, holding her printed evidence like it had betrayed her. She didn't speak, but as she left, she shot me a look like I'd kicked her golden retriever. I stood in the doorway of my uncle's house, looking down at the trunk like it had started a war. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was that same old silence settling back in. Thicker this time. Heavier. Like it knew this wasn't over. I figured that was the worst of it. A misguided HOA president with a flair for drama and a printed photo from Google Images. I thought she'd retreat, regroup, and maybe stew about it over a microwaved lasagna. But I underestimated one thing. Karen didn't just want the trunk. She wanted a win. And when she couldn't get one through the cops, she reached for the next best weapon in her arsenal. Public humiliation. That night, while I was in the garage unpacking a crate of clamps and oil stains, my phone buzzed once, then again, then again. By the time the fourth notification hit, I knew something was wrong. A neighbor I hadn't met yet sent me a message. Hey, is this about you? Attached was a blurry screenshot from Facebook, a post from the Vista Ridge Hollow HOA community page, and at the top, in all caps, suspicious individual seen unloading property, stolen property, community safety alert. The post read like a neighborhood thriller written by a wine-soaked committee. Karen had uploaded a photo of me, arms loaded with table legs, sweat on my brow, taken from what looked like a Ring camera across the street. The caption, this man was seen unloading furniture resembling archived items stolen from the clubhouse in 2018. Do not approach. HOA security is reviewing footage. We will protect our history. It would have been hilarious if it weren't followed by 50-something comments ranged from call ICE to he looks like he's squatting. Did anyone verify ownership? Someone even asked if I was living in a shed conversion and called my cedar trunk suspiciously ornate. I sat back stunned. My house, my furniture, my family's legacy, and now I was the villain in some twisted suburban episode of Law and Order HOA unit. I took a screenshot of every comment, every accusation, because I knew this wasn't Karen going rogue. This was a campaign, and I'd just become her propaganda poster. The next day, my mailbox was missing. Not vandalized, not knocked over, gone. Just the wooden posts left, splintered and sad like a forgotten tombstone. I found it 30 feet away in the bushes, spray painted with a bright red K, and what looked like, was that a drawing of a snake? Charming. I spent the morning reinstalling it, tightening every bolt, like I was preparing for siege warfare. That afternoon, the eggs came, 3 to be precise, each from a different angle. One exploded against my windshield, another hit the garage door. The third mist rolled slowly down the hood like it had second thoughts. When I came out to clean the mess, I spotted a man in a polo shirt across the street, standing on his lawn like a garden gnome with judgment issues. He didn't blink, didn't wave, just stood there watching, as if daring me to say something. For a second, I thought about it, then I remember what Uncle Harold once told me, don't argue with a man who's got lawn clippers and no hobbies. It didn't stop there. Tuesday morning, I backed out of the driveway, pop, pop, 2 tires blown, galvanized nails about 3 inches long, scattered across the street like breadcrumbs to a lawsuit. I picked one up. The head was sharp, fresh, deliberate. This wasn't some neighborhood kid being dumb. This was a message. I called the sheriff's department again. Officer Ruiz showed up, recognized me, gave me a tired smile. I showed him the Facebook post, the nails, the mailbox graffiti. He nodded, jotted notes, then said, the HOA board says they aren't involved. I almost laughed. Yeah, and I guess those eggs threw themselves. He offered a sympathetic shrug. It's not enough to prove direct action. I didn't yell, didn't snap, just nodded slowly and decided right then I was done reacting. It was time to prepare. That night, I ordered motion lights, a full set of exterior cameras, and set up automatic cloud backups. I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being tested. But the real test came on Thursday morning. I'd left early to pick up wood glue, clamps, and a new belt sander from town. When I came back around 10:30, I saw it instantly. The side gate, wide open. That gate was latched from the inside, always. My stomach dropped. I parked fast and ran toward the house, scanning for signs, and then I saw it. The cedar trunk, still there, but moved, only slightly, about a foot off from where I left it. The wood beneath it scratched, one iron clasp bent inward like someone had tried to pry it. I stormed into the house and pulled up the security footage. What I saw made my skin crawl. A man in a tan jacket and black gloves, moving with practiced ease. He jimmied the lock, stepped inside, and began inspecting my furniture like he was shopping with someone else's credit. He didn't take anything. He tagged it with a small white sticker. I froze the frame and zoomed in. It read, Vista Ridge Catalog, KM. Property Evaluation, KM, Karen McRae. And that's when I realized Karen hadn't just sent a message. She'd sent someone into my home. The rest of that morning moved in slow motion, the kind of slow where your thoughts race but your hands feel like they're underwater. I sat in my office, the cursor blinking on the paused security feed, staring at the image of that sticker like it had just declared war. Karen didn't send a lawyer. She didn't send a notice. She sent a man in gloves to creep through my living room and label my family's furniture like it was part of an HOA bake sale. I called the sheriff's department again. This time I didn't ask. I demanded. When they showed up, I didn't bother with pleasantries. I played the footage, pointed at the bent clasp, the scuff marks, the sticker. Officer Ruiz was back, and this time his posture changed. He leaned in. That guy, I know him. That's Samuel Heller. Used to run a liquidation firm out of Albuquerque. Lost his license 3 years ago for unlicensed estate seizures. He gave a low whistle. He's not supposed to be inspecting anything, let alone breaking and entering. That was the first time I saw real concern in their faces. They filed a report, dusted the trunk for prints, and bagged the sticker as evidence. One of the younger deputies, maybe fresh out of academy, asked me, "You got beef with the HOA or something?" I just laughed, but it didn't reach my eyes. Apparently, my inheritance is offensive to local politics. They promised to follow up. I didn't hold my breath, but I did email every file, every video clip, every timestamp motion alert to a backup drive and then sent copies to a lawyer friend I knew in Santa Fe, just in case. That night I tried to find calm. I cracked a beer, sat on the porch and listened to the wind move through the mesquite trees. But instead of peace, I got headlights. A white news van, complete with station logos and a satellite dish, crept up the road and stopped in front of my house like it was casing the scene of a soap opera murder. A perky woman in heels and too much foundation hopped out, flanked by a cameraman with a massive mic boom. She waved like we were old friends. "Hi, we're covering a developing situation involving possible HOA property and unauthorized possession." I blinked. "You mean the trunk in my living room?" She beamed. "Exactly. Would you like to comment before the segment airs?" I stared at her. "Absolutely. Get off my land." She laughed, assuming I was joking, until I took a step forward. They packed up fast, but it was too late. The story aired at 6. Karen appeared on screen, standing at the edge of my driveway like she'd been cast in a Netflix HOA docudrama, saying with faux grace, "Sometimes when a community loses something, it comes home in unexpected ways." She wasn't talking about the trunk. She was talking about control, and if that line didn't get her an Emmy, it definitely earned her a restraining order. That segment lit the local Facebook groups on fire. Comments poured in, some defending Karen, others calling it petty, but most just speculating wildly. A few accused me of hoarding communal history like I was Gollum guarding antique furniture. But then something unexpected happened. People who knew Harold began commenting. An older woman posted a photo from 1992 of Harold building the porch. Same trunk sitting in the background. Another guy uploaded a scan of a newsletter from the original construction days. Apparently, Harold was one of the builders of the Vista Ridge Clubhouse. It didn't just prove ownership, it made Karen look ridiculous. Still, I wasn't satisfied with just Facebook redemption. I needed legal firepower, so I did what Harold would have done. Dug my heels in and called the meanest lawyer I could afford. Her name was Nina Morales. Mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper tongue. She picked up the phone on the first ring. I laid out everything. HOA drama, trunk war, sticker sabotage, and media smear campaign. When I finished, she was silent for a second. Then she said, "Good. I hate HOAs. Send me everything." By the end of the next day, a certified cease and desist had been delivered to the Vista Ridge board. It wasn't just a letter. It was a declaration. accusations of defamation, trespass, harassment, and implied intent to seize private property. Karen had crossed the line, and this time it wasn't a property boundary. It was the legal kind. Nina's final instruction before hanging up stuck with me like a loaded warning. She wanted a turf war? We'll give her scorched earth. What I didn't know yet was that Karen hadn't even played her wildest card. Turns out Nina was right, because by the following Sunday, Karen stopped pretending this was a polite dispute over property lines or community heritage. She dropped the facade like a used name tag and went full theater. That morning, I opened my door and found a thick envelope waiting on the porch, sealed with that same HOA logo I was quickly growing allergic to. No stamp, no mailman, just hand-delivered drama. Inside was a multi-page notification of community review from the Vista Ridge Hollow HOA, signed naturally by Karen McCrae. The language was so aggressively bureaucratic it could have been weaponized. According to their letter, my continued possession of historically relevant items potentially resembling community archive property was now under formal review. They demanded I surrender the cedar trunk, a hand-tooled desk, and a mahogany bookshelf. Spending committee evaluation for my own damn furniture. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. They wanted me to just hand over family heirlooms so a committee of clipboard jockeys could squint at them and decide if they looked familiar. I snapped a photo of the letter, texted it to Nina with the caption, "They want a furniture lineup. Should I dust the trunk for fingerprints myself?" She called me 2 minutes later, practically giddy. "They've crossed into parody," will respond, "but I need more documents. Restoration invoices, photos, family records, anything that proves provenance." So I went digging. Spent the rest of the day in Harold's old filing cabinet, buried under blueprints, oil-stained receipts, and newspaper clippings. And there it was, an invoice from 1976, handwritten by a craftsman in Las Cruces. Custom clasp repair cedar trunk, initials in cedar, initial HPP, gold mine. I scanned it, emailed it, and taped a copy to the inside of the lid. Let them try and argue with that. But Karen wasn't slowing down, not after being embarrassed on TV and having her little sticker stunt exposed. No, she doubled down like a raccoon in a trash can. That Tuesday, I got another letter, this time an official civil complaint. Karen, acting on behalf of the Vista Ridge Hollow Historical Preservation Subcommittee, was suing me. Not for theft, that wouldn't hold. No, she'd pivoted to a new legal buzzword, implied stewardship. According to the suit, the trunk and accompanying furniture were highly similar in material design and historic value to items previously believed lost from the HOA clubhouse. Therefore, the HOA was seeking temporary injunction and transfer of custody until ownership could be evaluated in a court of law. Nina read the complaint with the expression of someone watching a toddler try to assemble a tax return. "This isn't a lawsuit," she muttered. "It's cosplay with paperwork." Still, it was enough to trigger court protocol. Dates were set, motions were filed, and while Nina handled the legal side, I dealt with the fallout. Neighbors I hadn't even met before started side-eyeing me when I walked down the street. One guy walked past and mumbled, "That's the guy hoarding heritage." Another woman left a pamphlet in my mailbox titled, "Protecting Community Identity, Why Archives." Inside was a smiling photo of Karen, arms folded, standing in front of the community center with an empty trunk behind her like a prop in a high school play. The message was clear. I wasn't just being sued, I was being turned into a pariah. But for every passive-aggressive nod, I got quiet support, too. One man, Gordon, an older guy from the far end of the block, walked over one afternoon, pointed at the workshop, and said, "That trunk's been on that porch since the Reagan administration." Oh. "Don't let them gaslight you, son." That gave me more fire than 1,000 cease and desists. So I turned the workshop into a fortress, upgraded the camera system, documented every item. I started recording myself walking through the house each morning, timestamp narration and all. Not because I was scared, because I knew people like Karen, they don't just push boundaries, they redraw the map and pretend they've always owned it. Still, nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Because Karen wasn't just gathering paperwork or assembling a courtroom ambush. She was building something far more dangerous, a fake majority. And the next time I saw her, she wasn't holding a clipboard. She was holding a ballot. The ballot came in the form of another envelope, This one slid into my door frame without a knock, like a calling card from a magician who specialized in nuisance and overreach. It was an official invitation to a special emergency session of the Vista Ridge Hollow HOA Board, scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center. The agenda? Reassessment of community leadership structure and property boundary clarifications. Translation: Karen was staging a comeback tour and trying to redraw the lines, literally and figuratively. Attached to the letter was a roster of voting members, most names I recognized from past HOA newsletters or angry Facebook threads. But one name stood out: William P. Talland. That lot had been empty for months. The lawn was overgrown, mailbox dented, no trash pickup, no porch light. But suddenly, William P. Talland had voting power. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just gunning for revenge, she was rigging the system. I brought the roster to Nina that afternoon, and she didn't even blink. Nepotism special, she said, sipping her coffee. Karen's nephew probably filed a lease agreement 5 days ago, just enough to give him temporary voting rights. I've seen this before. It's HOA Voter Fraud 101, she grinned. Bring a notebook. This is going to be good. So I went, not for Karen, not for the circus, because if she was going to try to steal my land using phony ballots and legal acrobatics, I wanted front row seats when the trapeze snapped. The Vista Ridge Community Center looked like someone had tried to make a courtroom out of folding chairs and passive aggression. Half the neighborhood showed up, some out of curiosity, some because they genuinely believed a war over a cedar trunk was the most exciting thing to happen since the 4th of July hot dog incident. The tension in the room felt like it could peel paint. Karen arrived wearing a crimson blazer that looked like it had been chosen specifically to contrast with my soul. She walked in with a new board flanking her like she was launching a product line, all nods and tight smiles. She greeted the room with sugary warmth, then dove straight into her pitch. In light of recent disputes, it is imperative that we revisit leadership roles to better protect the historical integrity and communal interests of Vista Ridge Hollow. Every word was carefully polished, rehearsed, hollow. When she mentioned community integrated property oversight, I saw 3 people tilt their heads like confused golden retrievers. That was my cue. I stood up. Quick question, I said, holding up the roster. Lot 39, William Talland. Anyone here ever met him? Silence. Anyone ever seen a car in his driveway, a light in the window? More silence. Unless he's Casper the voting ghost, I'd say we've got ourselves a fake resident. Before Karen could jump in with some smooth-talking nonsense, another voice rang out, calm, clear, and filled with restrained fury. He's her nephew, lives in Nevada. She filed a fake lease agreement to stuff the board. Heads turned. It was Melissa Hammond, the former HOA treasurer, holding a thick folder and a face that said she was done being polite. I resigned 3 months ago when I found out Karen had been falsifying documents to push her own agenda. And I've got the emails to prove it. She slapped the folder on the table with the kind of finality usually reserved for gavel bangs and guilty verdicts. The room erupted. Someone clapped. Another person stood up and shouted, "Finally!" One of Karen's so-called board members removed his lanyard and slid it across the table like he'd just quit a pyramid scheme. Karen tried to regain control, but the wave had already turned. The vote came quickly. Of the 30 eligible members present, 23 voted against Karen's return, 5 abstained, and only 2 supported her, one of them being the empty chair reserved for her ghost nephew. Karen didn't speak. She just adjusted her blazer, gave me a look that could sharpen knives, and walked out without a word. No fireworks, no meltdown, just quiet defeat. But as she passed, she leaned in and whispered, "You haven't won, not yet." And didn't respond. I didn't need to, because at that moment I realized something critical. Karen had just lost the thing she valued more than the trunk, more than control, the illusion of power. But power, like Karen's patience, tends to crack under pressure. And she wasn't done cracking yet. Karen might have left that meeting in silence, but silence from someone like her doesn't mean surrender, it means plotting. And sure enough, just 4 days after her dethroning, I received notice from the county courthouse. Karen had escalated. She was filing a formal lawsuit against me. Civil court, not criminal, but dressed up in enough legal jargon to choke a goat. The core accusation, that my possession of the cedar trunk and accompanying furniture constituted malicious misappropriation of communal artifacts. Her lawyer, someone named Roy Haskins from Albuquerque, filed the complaint with pages of fluff about community cohesion, historical value, and something called emotional continuity assets. I had to read that part 3 times before I realized they were trying to argue that the sentimental aura of Vista Ridge somehow extended into my living room. I handed the paperwork to Nina, who skimmed it, snorted, then said, "I've argued with kindergartners who had more consistent logic." But she wasn't laughing for long, because buried in the stack was a sneaky little clause. Karen was petitioning the court for a temporary injunction to have the trunk and 2 other pieces, my desk and bookshelf, removed from the property and held in neutral storage during the proceedings. In other words, she wanted the court to seize my furniture before proving she had any legal right to it. "No way in hell we let that through," Nina said. "We'll file a counter motion. But we're also going on offense now. Full suit. Harassment, trespass, false claims, defamation, and abuse of HOA power." That last charge hit different. It wasn't just about me anymore. Karen had manipulated the HOA to serve her vendetta, and now that vendetta had a price tag. While Nina gathered the war chest, I focused on strengthening my side of the battlefield. I pulled every document: Harold's will, the 1976 repair invoice, photos from when I was a teenager sitting on that same trunk. But the real smoking gun came from Melissa. She handed me a copy of internal HOA emails, screenshots she'd saved before resigning. One of them was from Karen, dated months before I'd moved in, saying, "Once he's settled, we'll make our move. The trunk should still be in the house. If we control the narrative, we can recover it for the community." There it was. Proof that this wasn't about confusion or mistaken identity. It was premeditated. I printed that email and had it framed, half out of spite, half because I knew one day it'd be part of a closing argument that would make a judge spit out his coffee. Still, Karen being Karen, she wasn't content with legal chaos alone. That week, someone from the local neighborhood watch tried to check on my property, citing concerns about unstable furniture placement visible from the street. I politely invited him to check himself out of my yard. A few days later, I found a flyer taped to my fence. "Historic theft is still theft." It had a grainy photo of the trunk, clearly screenshotted from the news segment, and the caption, "Return what was lost, repair the trust." Underneath was a phone number. I called it. It went straight to voicemail. Karen's voice: "Thank you for calling Vista Ridge Hollow Preservation Committee. We are currently reviewing claims of property misplacement. Leave a message if you have info." I didn't leave a message, but I did call Nina. "Good," she said. "They just created a paper trail." The court date was set for 3 weeks later, and that time we prepped like it was a Super Bowl trial. Nina requested depositions from HOA members. Melissa agreed to testify, Gordon too. The younger deputy from the earlier investigation sent over his incident report from the break-in, and we had the footage, the fingerprints, the sticker, every petty escalation Karen had made, every egg, every flyer, every twisted sentence from her Facebook posts. We cataloged them all. And while we built our case, something started shifting in the neighborhood. People stopped avoiding me. A few even dropped by the workshop to see the famous trunk. One guy brought his teenage son. "Thought you were some nut," he said, "but now looks like you're the only sane one left." I smiled, handed his son a chisel, and said, "Want to learn how to carve initials into justice?" He laughed, but I wasn't kidding. The war wasn't over, but for the first time I had an army. The morning of the hearing felt less like going to court and more like heading into battle. I dressed with intention. Dark denim, clean boots, and a plain button-up. Respectable, but not corporate. Like a man defending what's his, not someone begging for sympathy. Nina arrived early, cool and surgical as ever, carrying a binder so thick it could have broken a lesser attorney's back. "We're not just defending you," she said. "We're indicting a mindset." That sentence stuck with me as we walked into the beige, low-slung courthouse downtown. A building designed specifically to make justice look as boring as possible. Inside, however, was anything but boring. Reporters were there. Some of the same HOA members I'd seen squinting at me through hedges now stood in line for seating. Melissa Hammond was already seated near the front row, folders in hand. Gordon gave me a thumbs up as I passed. This wasn't just about me in a trunk anymore. It was about a neighborhood tired of being ruled by a clipboard and lipstick. Karen made her entrance with a flair that almost made me laugh. Charcoal blazer, silk scarf, sunglasses indoors. Her lawyer, Roy Haskins, followed like a man who had never once won a case without saying the words, "but technically." They took their seats, postured for the cameras, and waited. The bailiff called the case. McRae versus Price. It sounded absurd just hearing it aloud. Then the judge entered. Honorable Margaret Linton, gray suit, no nonsense, eyes like twin lie detectors. Nina began with precision. She opened by framing the case not as a property dispute, but as a systematic campaign of harassment, defamation, and abuse of procedural power orchestrated by an individual misusing a position of influence. Then she introduced the sticker, the security footage, the email, every single piece lined up like dominoes. When Melissa took the stand and explained how Karen stacked the board with fake votes and filed false leases, it stopped being a neighbor dispute. It became a blueprint for institutional bullying. Karen, when it was her turn, performed. That's the only way I can describe it. She spoke in soft tones, referenced heritage and the soul of Vista Ridge. She said she deeply regretted any confusion, claimed her actions stemmed from a desire to preserve, not possess. When Nina cross-examined her, it took 3 questions to crack the act. Did you or did you not authorize a man with a revoked liquidation license to enter my client's property without permission? Karen hesitated. I assumed he was credentialed. You assumed someone in gloves could break in and tag furniture because you felt the community had a right to it? He was simply documenting for future consideration. Nina held up the photo of the sticker. This looked like consideration or possession to you? Karen flinched. Her lawyer objected on vague grounds. The judge overruled it before he even finished the sentence. The courtroom was quiet, and for the first time, Karen's mask cracked, just for a second, but it was enough. The ruling came swift and clean. Judge Linton didn't miss words. This court finds that the plaintiff, Miss McRae, engaged in an intentional campaign to defame, harass, and intimidate the defendant under the guise of procedural authority. This campaign included false reporting, unauthorized entry, and misuse of community leadership to serve a personal agenda. Then she dropped the hammer. Karen was ordered to pay $85,000, 0 cents in damages, including legal fees. But more than that, she was formally barred from holding any leadership position in Vista Ridge or any HOA entity for a minimum of 10 years. The room didn't cheer, but it rippled with satisfaction, like a sigh held too long, finally released. As Karen exited, quiet now, defeated, one neighbor muttered just loud enough to be heard, "Guess the HOA now stands for her overeens abolished." Even I had to smirk at that one. Outside, the sun hit different. People clapped me on the back, shook my hand. Someone brought coffee. The workshop became more than just a hobby spot. It turned into a symbol. Locals started calling it the trunk house. Kids would ride by on bikes and point. One guy even asked if he could host a small concert there because it feels like the place where things change. And they did. Melissa was officially reinstated to the board. Gordon took over as community liaison. And perhaps most poetic of all, the HOA bylaws were rewritten with a new clause: no community member shall access, review, or relocate any property not explicitly under HOA ownership without written consent. In other words, don't touch your neighbor's stuff. But as peaceful as things seemed, I had a feeling Karen wasn't quite finished with her dramatic exits. Something told me the finale would still come with fireworks. I was right, because just when I thought the curtain had finally dropped on Karen Magra's suburban opera of delusion, she decided to go out with a bang, and a camera crew. It was 2 weeks after the court ruling, and the neighborhood had settled into a rare peace. No flyers, no angry Facebook rants, no unsolicited HOA inspections. For the first time in months, I was back to working in my shop without looking over my shoulder. That's when I got the call from Nina. "You're going to want to turn on the local news," she said, already chuckling. I did and nearly dropped my coffee. There she was, Karen, on screen, wearing a neon orange vest, holding a trash grabber, picking up litter in the parking lot of the Vista Ridge Community Center. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Former Ohio President, complete court-ordered community service." The segment showed her solemnly tossing a paper cup into a bin while a kid rode by on a scooter yelling, "Thanks, trash queen." Apparently, the judge had sweetened the settlement terms. In lieu of additional punitive damages, Karen had agreed to perform 200 hours of supervised community service, visible, documented, and preferably humiliating. Someone had the genius idea of live streaming her weekly cleansing walks through the HOA YouTube page, which quickly became a hit with local viewers. Comments ranged from, "Finally, Karen's cleaning up the mess she made," to, "Can we get her to do gutters next?" One clip went viral. Karen, stooping to pick up a fast food wrapper as a voice off-screen muttered, "That's the closest she's ever been to actual community service." She never looked up, never smiled, just quietly cleaned, expression fixed in a frown that could curdle milk. It wasn't jail time, but it was poetic in a way no sentence ever could be. As for me, the workshop thrived. The cedar trunk, now polished and sealed, sat at the center like an altar. I installed a brass plaque on it that read, "Stolen? No. Inherited? Defended?" Neighbors dropped by just to see it. One couple brought their daughter, said they wanted her to meet the guy who stood up to HOA tyranny and won. Someone even offered to buy a replica. I told them I don't make copies, I only make originals. But I did start a weekend woodshop class. First session, I had 6 people. By the third, I had a waiting list. We called it Grains of Truth. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. We built benches, birdhouses, and at one point, a hand-carved sign that Melissa hung outside the HOA office. Respect is not regulated, it's earned. The most surprising change, though, came from the neighborhood itself. Once fractured by fear, it began to mend. Melissa, now official HOA president, slashed the red tape. Meetings became open, not orchestrated. People actually started talking to their neighbors again. Barbecues returned, kids played on shared lawns, and nobody cared if your trash bin wasn't color-coded. They even threw a block party to celebrate the new era and asked if I'd host it on my property. I agreed on one condition: the playlist had to include Johnny Cash and someone had to bring pie. Both happened. And yes, the trunk was part of the decor, lit by string lights, surrounded by laughter and ribs. As for Karen, word was she sold her house for below market value and moved to a retirement complex near Tucson. Tried to apply for a board seat there too, got politely laughed out of the room. Last I heard, she'd taken up competitive knitting, fewer bylaws to weaponize, maybe more time for reflection. But around here, her legacy was sealed, not in marble, but in memes. Someone started a sticker line. What would Karen do? Spoiler, the answer was always don't. The HOA, once feared, had been reshaped by its own reckoning. And I got to keep my land, my legacy, and my peace. One evening, months later, as the sun dipped low and the trunk caught the last of the golden light, a new neighbor wandered into the shop. He eyed the plaque and asked, "Is that the one? The trunk that started it all?" I nodded. He grinned. "Huh, thought it'd be bigger." I smiled, leaned on my workbench, and said, "Nah, just heavy enough to bury a dictator's career." Then I passed him a chisel. "You ever carve truth into something solid?" He shook his head. "Nope." I handed him a block of cedar. "Good. Let's start small." Sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought in courtrooms or with fists. They're fought on porches, in Facebook groups, and across invisible lines drawn by people desperate to feel important. But here's the truth. Your boundaries are worth defending, even when the enemy hides behind clipboards and bylaws. This story isn't just about a trunk or a petty HOA feud. It's about standing up when it would have been easier to back down, about calling out nonsense when it's dressed in community policy. And most importantly, it's about proving that one person with enough grit, evidence, and support can dismantle a bully in a pantsuit. So if someone tries to rewrite your history, redraw your property lines, or reassign your worth, remember, you don't need permission to protect what's yours. You just need a camera, a lawyer, and the courage to say, "Not today, Karen." Drop a comment if you faced a neighborhood tyrant, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of everyday justice.